In 1953, the average American family spent 22% of their income on food. But for millions of working-class families across the South, the Midwest, and the rural hollows of Appalachia, even that number was out of reach. They ate differently. They cooked differently. They stretched $1 into a week of meals using techniques and ingredients that have all but vanished from the American table. Some of these meals will surprise you. A few will make you uncomfortable, and at least one of them, I can promise you, was better than anything sitting in your refrigerator right now. Number 3 on this list was served in school cafeterias, church basements, and every farmhouse from Georgia to Iowa. Number 9 was considered a luxury meal in households where meat appeared twice a week if you were lucky. And number 1, the dish that defined how an entire generation of American working families ate through the leanest years of the 20th century, has been almost completely forgotten. These 25 dinners fed a nation. Then we threw them away the moment we could afford to. Before we start, hit subscribe. What you're about to see might just make you pick up the phone and call your grandmother. Number 25, milk toast. Before we get to the interesting ones, let's start with the one that will tell you everything about how this cooking thought about food. Bread and milk. A bowl, a few slices of day-old white bread torn into rough pieces, warm milk poured over the top, sometimes a pinch of sugar. That was supper in rural homes across Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia on the nights when the money ran out and the week was not over. Mothers called it a poor supper. Children did not know the difference. The bread swelled soft in the warm milk, turning the whole bowl into something almost like porridge. A loaf of bread cost 16 cents in 1952. A quart of milk was 21 cents. For a family of 6, this was dinner for under 50 cents. Nobody talks about it now, but in 1,000 quiet kitchens at the end of a long day, this was the taste of getting through. And getting through was the whole point. Number 24, fried mush. Leftover cornmeal porridge, poured into a loaf pan the night before and left to set firm overnight, then sliced in the morning into half-inch slabs and fried in bacon grease until each side turned deep gold and crackling. This was not an accident or an improvisation. This was a deliberate 2-day cooking strategy. You made the mush on Monday night for dinner. You made the fried mush on Tuesday morning for breakfast. One pot of cornmeal, water, and salt produced 2 completely different meals with 2 completely different textures and 2 completely different reasons to sit down at the table. The outside of fried mush crackled like the crust of good cornbread. The inside stayed dense and almost custardy. Drizzled with sorghum or cane syrup, it disappeared from the plate faster than anything more complicated. In Appalachian households, this appeared so regularly that children grew up thinking it was just what breakfast was. They were not wrong. Number 23. Crackers and milk. Some meals in post-war America existed purely to silence hunger before bed. Crackers and milk was one of them. Saltines broken into a glass of cold milk eaten with a spoon. That was the unofficial last meal of children across the rural South and Midwest on nights when there was nothing left to cook. What made it a real thing, a ritual rather than a defeat, was the way mothers served it. The same way every time. The crackers went in first. The milk came after. You waited 30 seconds for them to soften just enough to hold their shape. Then you ate fast before they turned to paste. Oral histories from the era speak of this with surprising warmth. It was the last thing before sleep. Simple, reliable. Theirs, a box of saltines ran about a dime. The milk was already in the icebox. Nobody who ate this regularly felt deprived. They felt full, which was the only thing that mattered. Number 22. Fried Bologna sandwiches. Every working-class kitchen in America kept a roll of Bologna in the refrigerator. It cost about 30 cents a pound in the mid-1950s and fed a family for days. But fried bologna was not something you threw together cold. Mothers cut thick slices, made 2 small notches in the edges so the meat would not curl, and laid them flat in a hot cast-iron skillet. The bologna blistered and browned at the edges, swelling up in the center from the heat, filling the kitchen with a smell that brought children running from 3 rooms away. Served on white bread with yellow mustard and maybe a slice of government cheese. This was was a proper hot meal, not an afterthought, not a snack, dinner. Men ate it after long shifts. Kids ate it before school. There was no shame in it because everyone at the table was eating the same thing, and the kitchen smelled like something worth coming home to. Number 21. Tomato soup. Here's where things get strange, and strange in the best possible way. In the 1950s, condensed tomato soup, kind in the red and white can, was baked directly into chocolate spice cake. You replace the liquid in a standard spice cake recipe with a can of Campbell's tomato soup, and what came out of the oven was a dense, moist, warmly spiced cake with a faint, earthy depth that no one could identify, but everyone wanted more of. The tomato flavor disappeared entirely in baking. What remained was something that made the spices more complex and kept the crumb moister longer than milk or water ever could. Women's magazines published the recipe. Church ladies baked it for potlucks. Families who could not afford proper baking ingredients discovered that a 10-cent can of soup could produce something that tasted like a celebration. Almost nobody makes it today. Almost nobody knows it ever existed. That is a loss of a genuinely clever piece of cooking that happened to look humble. Number 20. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable. Civilians called it SOS and ate it without complaint. Thin slices of dried, heavily salted beef, kind that came in small glass jars for about 35 cents, were torn into strips and stirred into a thick white sauce made of butter, flour, and milk, then poured over white toast. The saltiness of the beef seasoned the sauce without any additional effort needed. Toast soaked up the cream gravy and turned soft beneath the weight of it. Every veteran who came home from Korea or World War II had eaten this for breakfast on a base somewhere. They brought the recipe home because it was fast and filling. Mothers who had fed families through rationing recognized it immediately. Done right, this is one of the most satisfying things you can make in 15 minutes from pantry staples. Today, it appears nowhere except in discussions of military nostalgia. That is a genuine culinary loss dressed up as a punchline. Number 19. Salmon patties with creamed peas. Before tuna became the default pantry protein, canned salmon was the affordable fish that stretched across American working-class kitchens. A tall can of pink salmon cost about 25 cents in 1954. Mothers drained it, removed the larger bones, mixed it with cracker crumbs, egg, onion, and a spoonful of mustard, shaped it into patties, and fried them until golden on both sides. The outside crisped into a thin, crackling shell. The inside stayed moist and pink and almost creamy. Alongside them went creamed peas, which was its own small masterpiece. Canned peas warmed in a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk until the whole thing turned silky and faintly sweet, poured over the patties or served in a ring around them. Children who refused to eat fish ate salmon patties without a second thought. The recipe lived in every women's club cookbook from 1940 to 1965, then disappeared almost entirely when canned tuna got cheaper, something worth mourning. Number 18. Wilted lettuce salad with hot bacon dressing. This dish sounds like something a fine dining chef invented last year. It was actually the poor man's solution to limp garden lettuce and leftover bacon grease in Appalachia. Leaf lettuce, fresh from the garden, went into a bowl. In the skillet, bacon grease heated with a splash of apple cider vinegar and a pinch of sugar until it bubbled and spat. Then, the hot dressing poured directly over the raw lettuce. The heat wilted the leaves instantly. The vinegar brightened everything. The fat created a glossy, savory coating that turned garden greens into something almost elegant. Served alongside cornbread or pinto beans, this was a full summer evening meal. The technique appears in handwritten community cookbooks from Virginia to Arkansas, passed between neighbors who grew the same gardens and used the same skillet. Modern restaurants serve warm bacon vinaigrette over expensive greens and charge $18 for it. In 1954, this was Tuesday supper, and it cost almost nothing. Number 17. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. Farmers called it poor man's steak. Mothers called it hamburger gravy. Children just called it supper. Ground beef browned in a cast iron skillet with diced onion. A spoonful of flour stirred in to coat the meat. Then milk poured over slowly until the whole thing bubbled into a thick, savory white gravy loaded with beef throughout. Poured over a mountain of mashed potatoes made from scratch because boxed potato flakes were still a luxury. Ground beef cost 43 cents a pound in 1956. A 5-pound bag of potatoes was 29 cents. This fed 6 people for under $1. The gravy soaked into the potatoes so that every bite carried both. Heavy, filling, and deeply satisfying in the way that only starch and fat together can be. This appeared on dinner tables from Montana ranch kitchens to Detroit tenement apartments. It has no elegant name. It needed none. First, pattern break. Here's something worth stopping on. These meals were not eaten out of ignorance. The women who made them were not cooking badly. They were cooking under real constraints with real skill, doing what every generation of American women before them had done, taking the cheapest available ingredients and making something their families could sit down to at the end of a hard day and feel genuinely fed. There is a difference between poverty food and poor cooking. Every dish on this list is poverty food made by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The potato soup was thin because thinness stretched further. The beans took all day because all day was what they needed. The fried mush used last night's porridge because nothing that could feed someone was allowed to go to waste. The knowledge that went into these meals was real. When American families could afford to stop making them, they did. And the knowledge died with the generation that held it. We traded it for convenience and called that progress. What we actually traded it for was worse food at higher prices and the loss of a body of practical knowledge that kept millions of people alive and healthy through conditions that should have broken them. These dinners were not a consolation. They were the real thing. Number 16. Stuffed bell peppers. This was the dish that made 1 pound of ground beef feed a family of 6 without anyone feeling shortchanged. Halved bell peppers, scraped clean, filled with a mixture of browned ground beef, cooked rice, canned tomatoes, and onion, then baked in a dish with tomato juice in the bottom to steam them through. The rice doubled the volume of the filling for almost nothing. The pepper became the bowl, which meant one less thing to wash. Bell peppers cost about 5 cents each at a 1950s roadside market. Ground beef ran 43 cents a pound. These sat at the center of weeknight dinner tables across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. They looked like effort. They felt like abundance. They were neither. And that was exactly the point. The woman who could make a pound of ground beef feed 6 people without anyone asking for more was not cutting corners. She was doing something that required real skill, real planning, and the kind of arithmetic that becomes automatic when the margin for error is 0. Number 15. Macaroni and tomatoes. This is not mac and cheese. This is not pasta with marinara sauce. This is something older and more honest than either. Cooked elbow macaroni, drained, tossed back into the pot with a can of whole peeled tomatoes broken up by hand, salt, pepper, and a knob of bacon grease stirred through. That was it. The tomatoes coated the macaroni in an acidic, savory sauce that tasted like nothing from a restaurant. It was brighter, plainer, and more filling. A can of tomatoes cost about a box of macaroni was 9 cents. This fed 4 people with enough left for lunch the next day. Every Southern grandmother made this. Church cookbooks from Georgia to Mississippi listed it without quantities because everyone already knew. Today's home cooks have replaced it with jarred pasta sauce and never looked back. That is a loss that no one bothered to announce because no one was paying attention when it happened. Number 14. Salt pork and beans. This is a meal that built the American working class and then got erased from it. Salt pork, a piece of heavily cured fatback about the size of a fist, dropped into a pot of dried navy beans soaked overnight. The pot simmered for 3 to 4 hours until the beans turned soft and the broth became silky with rendered fat and deep pork flavor. A pound of dried navy beans cost about a dime. Salt pork was 12 cents a pound. This pot fed a family of 8 for 2 days. The beans absorbed the salt, the fat, and the cured pork flavor until they tasted like something far more expensive than what they were. Served with cornbread for sopping and sliced raw onion on the side. Every farm kitchen in the South and Midwest kept a crock of salt pork in the cellar. This was the meal that got people through hard winters, bad harvests, and weeks when the paycheck did not stretch far enough. Today, it is gone from the American table almost entirely. Nobody talks about what we lost when we stopped making it. Number 13, chicken and dumplings. By the 1950s, stewing hens were still the cheapest chicken you could buy, about 15 cents a pound compared to 35 cents for a fryer. Mothers simmered them for 2 hours until the meat fell from the bone and the broth turned golden and rich. Then the dumplings went in. Not the flat, rolled southern kind, the dropped kind. Spoonfuls of flour, baking powder, salt, and milk dropped directly into the simmering broth where they swelled into pale, tender clouds that absorbed the chicken flavor from the inside out. The whole pot thickened into something between a soup and a stew. This was the meal that appeared when someone was sick, when a neighbor had a death in the family, when the weather turned cold and nothing else would do. It was care made edible. It required attention and judgment and the knowledge of when the dumplings were done, which you could only learn by making it wrong a few times first. That knowledge is almost completely gone now. Most people under 50 have never made drop dumplings. Most people under 40 have never eaten them. Number 12, pinto beans and cornbread. Across the mountain south, this was not a side dish, this was the meal. A pot of pinto beans started the night before, soaked, then simmered all day with a ham hock or a piece of salt pork. No seasoning beyond salt and pepper and thyme. By supper, the beans had broken down at the edges, thickening the pot liquor into a dark, rich broth that tasted nothing like anything from a can. Cast iron skillet cornbread baked while the beans simmered. You crumbled the cornbread directly into the beans and ate from a single bowl. In parts of Kentucky and Tennessee, this appeared 5 or 6 nights a week for families who could not afford anything else. The beans cost 8 cents a pound. The ham hock was a scrap the butcher practically gave away. This meal built generations of Americans who worked in coal mines and textile mills and never asked for anything fancy. They did not need fancy. They had this, and this was enough. Number 11, navy bean soup with ham bone. After Easter or Christmas, when the ham was picked clean, the bone went straight into a pot of soaked navy beans with diced onion, celery, carrot, and a bay leaf. By afternoon, the kitchen smelled like something worth driving to. The broth turned the color of weak tea, cloudy with dissolved starch, and each bean swelled full and yielding around its soft center. The last scraps of meat that fell from the bone during cooking floated through the soup in tender shreds. Senate bean soup, essentially the same thing, has been served in the United States Senate dining room since the early 1900s. That one fact tells you everything about how sustaining this soup actually was. Senators are not a group known for eating poorly when they have other options. Today, we buy boxed broth and skip the bone. The depth of flavor left with it. Number 10, liver dumplings in broth. This is the one that separates the people who grew up in German-American households from everyone else. Beef or pork liver ground fine and mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, onion, parsley, and salt until it formed a soft dough. Then spoonfuls dropped into simmering beef beef broth where they cooked through into dense, savory little rounds that absorbed the broth and tasted of something deeply mineral and rich and unlike anything else on this list. German and Czech immigrant communities across the Midwest, from Nebraska to Wisconsin to the Ohio River Valley, ate liver dumplings in broth as a standard weeknight supper. It cost almost nothing. It provided more iron and B12 per serving than anything else a family at that income level could afford to put on the table. Almost nobody outside those communities had ever heard of it. Almost nobody inside those communities makes it anymore. It disappeared when the second and third generation decided that their grandparents' food was something to leave behind rather than carry forward. Second pattern break. Food companies do not want you thinking about this one too hard. The entire convenience food industry of the 1950s was built on convincing American women that the cooking their mothers did was not just unfashionable but actually inferior. That opening a can was modern. That scratch cooking was a burden. That the time spent making bean soup and chicken and dumplings from scratch could be better spent elsewhere. It worked. Within one generation, the knowledge that had fed this country for 200 years was gone from most kitchens. The women who held it were told they were being liberated from drudgery. What they were actually being sold was a more expensive way to eat worse food, while the companies that made the cans and the boxes pocketed the difference. The beans still cost less. The scratch version still tastes better. The nutrition is still there in the dried legume and the ham bone that the boxed version cannot replicate. The industry just needed you to forget that you knew how to make it, and they spent 50 years and billions of dollars making sure you did. Number 9. Egg pie. Every farmhouse had eggs, and every farmhouse had a pie crust made from lard and flour, and egg pie was what happened when you put the two together and called it dinner. Eggs beaten with milk, seasoned with salt and pepper, poured into an unbaked pie shell and baked at moderate heat until the custard set firm and the top turned a pale golden brown. Sometimes a handful of whatever vegetables were available went in. Leftover onions, a few scraps of bacon, whatever the garden had produced that week. Often it was just the eggs and the milk and the shell. This is essentially a quiche without the French name and the restaurant price. In 1950s farmhouse kitchens across the Midwest, it appeared on the table as a weeknight supper that cost almost nothing if you kept your own chickens and made your own lard. It was filling. It was protein. It was hot. Everything supper needed to be. Number 8. Potato soup with salt pork. On farms across the rural South and the Ozarks, potato soup was not a starter. It was the meal. Diced potatoes simmered in water with a chunk of salt pork until the potatoes were soft enough to break apart with a spoon, creating their own thick, starchy broth. Onions went in early. Salt and pepper went in at the end. A splash of canned evaporated milk turned the broth creamy without any butter or cream needed. Fatback cost 8 cents a pound. Potatoes came from the root cellar. This dinner cost almost nothing and filled every stomach at the table. The fat from the pork floated in small golden pools across the surface. Children dragged cornbread through the broth until the bowl was clean. Nothing was left. Nothing was ever left. That was the mark of a meal that worked. Number 7. Fried potatoes and onions. This requires clarification. The modern version of fried potatoes is a side dish. In the 1950s, for millions of families, a cast iron skillet full of sliced raw potatoes cooked low and slow with a sliced onion and bacon grease until everything turned golden and the potatoes crisped at the edges was supper. Nothing alongside it. Maybe bread. Potatoes cost about $3 for a 50-pound bag at a farm market. Bacon grease was saved in a can on the stove. The onion came from the garden. The whole meal cost pennies. The potatoes took on the flavor of the fat as they cooked, becoming something entirely different from a boiled potato. The onions caramelized into sweet, soft ribbons woven through the crisped starch. Children ate seconds. Fathers asked about thirds. This was not a meal of defeat. For families who had it every Wednesday, it was one of the best things they ate all week. Number 6. Split pea soup with ham. No other dish in the American poor man's kitchen stretched as far as a pot of split pea soup soup made with a ham bone and dried split peas. Dried green peas cost 9 cents a pound in the mid-1950s. The ham bone came from whatever was left of Sunday dinner. Everything else, water, onion, carrot, a bay leaf, came from the root cellar or the garden. Peas dissolved as they cooked, thickening the soup without flour or cream, turning the broth a pale, earthy green. The collagen from the ham bone gave the soup a body that coated a spoon and warmed a person from the inside out. Children who refused vegetables ate 2 bowls of this. Mothers made it Sunday afternoon and fed the family from it through Tuesday. The whole pot cost about 30 cents. No meal on this list gave more for less, and yet it has nearly vanished from American home cooking, replaced by canned soup that tastes of nothing in particular. Number 5. Slow-cooked greens with salt pork. If you understand this dish, you understand how the American South ate for the better part of 2 centuries. A large bunch of collard greens or turnip greens or mustard greens, washed and torn from their stems, dropped into a pot with a piece of salt pork and just enough water to cover, cooked low and slow for 1 to 2 hours until the greens wilted completely, and the pot liquor, the dark, salty, mineral-rich liquid at the bottom, turned the color of strong tea. The pot liquor was not a byproduct, it was the point. Cornbread was baked specifically to be crumbled into it. The greens themselves served alongside, dark and soft, and carrying the deep flavor of the cured pork. Nutritionists now know that collard greens cooked this way retain remarkable amounts of calcium, iron, and folate. Poor Southern families knew none of that. They knew it kept them strong. They were right. Number 4. Tomato gravy over biscuits. Bacon grease in a cast iron skillet. A spoonful of flour stirred in until it turned the color of a paper bag. A can of whole tomatoes crushed in by hand and a splash of water. Salt, black pepper, a pinch of sugar if the tomatoes were too sharp. Poured thick over split biscuits made from lard and flour and buttermilk. This was breakfast. Sometimes it was also supper. The tomatoes gave the gravy an acid brightness that cut through the richness of the lard biscuits beneath. Canned tomatoes cost 12 cents in 1955. Flour and lard came from the 50-pound bag kept in every Southern pantry. This gravy appeared on tables in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee on nearly every morning that was not Sunday. It has all but disappeared, which is a specific kind of loss, not a dramatic erasure, just a slow forgetting, 1 generation at a time until the thing that was once as common as breathing is something nobody under 60 has tasted. Number 3. Pinto beans and ham hock. Every Friday in kitchens from Baltimore to Birmingham, a ham hock went into a pot of soaked pinto beans or black-eyed peas and simmered for the better part of the afternoon. The ham hock, the lower portion of the pig's leg, was almost entirely bone, skin, and cartilage. But what it released into the cooking water during those long hours was extraordinary. The broth turned rust-colored and deeply smoky, thick with gelatin from the skin and collagen from the joints. The beans drank it in. By supper, the liquid was as satisfying as any stock you could make with 5 times the ingredients and twice the effort. Ham hocks sold for about 15 cents each in the 1950s. 2 fed a family comfortably. Church cookbooks from the era list this as the first recipe. Not because it was impressive, because everyone needed to know how to make, and the people who compiled those books understood that the most important knowledge was the knowledge everyone had and nobody had written down. Number 2. Succotash with salt pork. The word succotash comes from a Narragansett word meaning broken corn kernels, and the dish predates the United States by several centuries. Indigenous Americans taught it to settlers, and settlers carried it forward until it became a working-class staple across every region of the country. By the 1950s, succotash meant dried lima beans and corn simmered together with a piece of salt pork until everything softened softened into a thick, hearty stew with a smoky depth that made two vegetables taste like a complete meal. Lima beans ran about 10 cents a pound. Corn came from the garden or cost a nickel a can. The salt pork gave everything the fatty richness that made simple food feel substantial. In the South, a bowl of succotash and a wedge of cornbread was supper. In New England, the same dish appeared with a different bean and a different name. Every region had a version. Every version was cheap, nourishing, and filling in the way that only slow-cooked legumes can be. Today, it appears as a side dish at summer cookouts and nowhere else. Number 1. Bean soup. At the top of this list is something so plain, so unglamorous, so completely stripped of everything modern food culture values that naming it almost feels like a disappointment. Bean soup. Not a specific regional variety. Not a named recipe with a memorable origin story. Just dried beans, whatever kind was in the pantry, simmered in water with an onion, a bay leaf, and whatever scrap of cured pork was available, cooked until the beans broke down and thickened the water into something that could carry a family through a long, cold winter on almost nothing. This is the meal that appears in every American oral history of poverty, from the Depression through the post-war years. In Appalachian mining communities, in Dust Bowl farm towns, in urban tenements from Chicago to Cleveland, in the sharecropper shacks of the Mississippi Delta, bean soup was what kept families alive when everything else ran out. A pound of dried beans cost 8 to 10 cents throughout the 1950s. It fed 6 people for 2 days. Nothing in the American kitchen has ever done more for less, and nothing has been more thoroughly erased by the convenience economy that replaced it. We traded this meal for canned soup and frozen dinners and the comfortable amnesia of a full supermarket. The families who made it did not have that choice. They made it because they had to. They made it well. They fed their children on it, and those children grew up and forgot it existed. This is the meal we should remember most. Here is the challenge. Make one of these this week. The salmon patties, the tomato gravy over biscuits, the fried potatoes and onions for dinner, not breakfast, not as a side, as the meal. Make something your grandparents made without a second thought and make it once. Then tell me in the comments if it was as bad as you thought it would be, because I made the pinto beans and cornbread, and I have not bought canned soup since. These were not consolation meals. They were not the food of failure. They were the food of people who understood their ingredients completely, who wasted nothing, and who fed more mouths on less money than most modern cooks can imagine. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the tomato soup cake gets more attention than the split pea soup, because it should. These were not just dinners. They were a way of life we were sold out of.